What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Fatboyz Dynasty Podcast, coming at you on the Fantasyholics Podcast Network. I'm Bo. That is Brant. Keeping it kind of light today, Brant. Just some generic landing spots that we really like for these rookies. We're still really early into the off season. You and I haven't dove super deep on some of these rookies yet. We were talking kind of pre-show how we're kind of in that fantasy rut, like a lot of folks probably are this time of year, where it's hard to get motivated. I know you and I both kind of get sucked back in a little bit as the draft starts reeling closer, just to see what our favorite teams do, if any of our big stud fantasy players are impacted, and things of that nature. However, with the draft, it is getting closer. Every day gets us a little closer to that draft. It only feels right that we cover it somehow, and a light way for us to do it today is talk about some landing spots where it would be really attractive for these rookies to fall into.
Yeah, absolutely. The rookies is a big thing right now. Like you said, it's just kind of that slow NFL time. It's right before the new year. We're in the franchise tag zone. So before we dive into this rookies, this just came across the bottom of my ticker. Let's talk about a few things that have come out in the news. You have another Brazil game already confirmed. I think the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to be a home team. Sounds like, is it this year or next year that the Rams will be traveling to Ireland? Was it the Rams traveling to Ireland?
The Chargers have been announced as the Sao Paulo, Brazil team so far. I hadn't seen the Steelers, but I know that the Chargers were.
Yeah.
And I think it is the Rams that are going to Ireland. I think
because actually it was crazy because my aunt texts me and Dad and says, "Hey, there's a chance Seattle might be going to Ireland." And I said, "I'm in." The wife looks at me and goes, "You already have your passport." So I think I have permission if it's in the right realm for me to go to Ireland. And my leprechaun butt won't pass on that. They're going to get some Irish food there. But let's talk about, what do you like about these overseas and what games and what do you dislike? Let's talk about a little bit of the news that's coming out. And then I got one more thing that came across the bottom of the ticker too.
Yeah, so I'll tell it to you like this, Brant. I think the pros of the overseas game obviously grow the game, which is good for people like you and I that are trying to make names for ourselves in this industry, obviously, and the rest of the Fantasyholics page. It's good to get that brand exposure overseas. Just like soccer and cricket and rugby and those other sports are starting to infiltrate the USA a little bit more. It only makes sense. On a personal level, though, obviously there's some likes and dislikes, and they're again relevant to the same thing. You're talking like a Friday afternoon game in Brazil that I have to remember not to put these flex players in the certain spots in the lineup. They got to go into certain roster spots. And it just makes decisions all that much harder with injuries. Do I wait on this guy? I've got this guy playing overseas this week, so it's a really early contest. And player B plays at 3:00 slate on Sunday, who's questionable. Do I wait for player B or do I go ahead and play the player overseas? But also it gives me more football, right? It gives me another game I can watch when I don't have, the rest of the schedule on. So it's not a competing interest.
Yeah, so I'm in the same boat with that there. I like the overseas games when they're on Sunday morning because that gives us football all day long. I know it kills some of our viewership because when it's two big star-studded teams, you have a lot of fantasy relevancy in that game already. If you have a slight addiction to throwing a little extra bread out there, you catch yourself, going, "Please, Travis Etienne, find the end zone this week," or something like that. And and I get it. It's great. It's great to have all day football for those. Excuse me, but yeah, that just came across my ticker down low. And then one thing that you and me do need to discuss this offseason, and maybe a couple weeks from now, is all these coaches changes. How's that going to affect your fantasy team? I just realized, obviously, the Eagles announced their OC today. I missed the name, but that was Kellen Moore moving on. So that is something that fantasy players and everything, you do got to pay attention to, because that's the changing of your offense is player A, that wide receiver, 10 last year. Is he going to repeat as wide receiver 10, or does the new coaching staff like to rely on the run, kind of like Vegas? That's kind of where I'm at. Vegas was Brock Bowers. That was about the only main attraction there. But next year you may see a running back, possibly a rookie running back there in Vegas. So that would roll us, talking about these rookies in some good landing spots and everything else. But that's something we do got to discuss this offseason is these coaches changes and how they may affect some of these fantasy players.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can definitely jump on that soon because you're absolutely right. That does have fantasy implications. That's something usually you and I have covered by this time in the off season. But again, we're both in a little bit of a rut right now. Life's busy. Sometimes it's hard to crawl, scratch and claw our way to the computers for the hour or so that we spend towards the show on a Wednesday evening. Not counting getting notes prepared and getting the kids all situated to get them so they're quiet and not in the background. But yeah, we definitely will do that soon. Now, I want to ask before we start talking about these general landing spots. I told you ahead of time I was going to have some questions for you. So obviously, in drafts in the past, right? Last year we had Marvin Harrison and Malik Neighbors, that debate. We had, you go back a couple years prior, it was the Najee Harris versus ETN. You have the, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Drake London year. Like, there's been some years where we've really had some debate, and it was easy to plant your flag on a couple different guys and say, I could see this guy being the number one in this class. I could see this guy being the number. And it feels to me like this year we have some top end in talent, at the running back position. It feels like Ashton Genty, which we both kind of talked about a little pre-show. Neither one of us are super sold on him at this point. But it feels like everybody's all in on him at running back. And then there's a bunch of other guys. It's a really good class. I think this class, kind of rejuvenates the dynasty landscape. It gives some youthful running backs into the world again that I think are a little bit better than last year's class overall, but it's a crapshoot on who's next. I saw a take on Twitter today for Trayvon Henderson being the RB2 in this class. So, I mean, people's opinions are all over. Then you go into the wide receiver room and it's, Ted McMillan and Luther Burden, and then there's kind of a drop off. And same thing with the tight end landscape. There's a few tight ends, Lovelace and Warren, who, have kind of rose to the cream of the crop, right? But the rest of it's kind of a crapshoot. Do you feel like this year's draft class is kind of lackluster, or is it just we'll get there with this class as we get closer?
I think a lot of these players, it's going to take a little time. I do think the two wide receivers that you mentioned, as long as they land in a wide receiver needy spot, which we'll discuss here in a minute, I do think those guys could possibly take off pretty quickly with McMillan and Burden. I think both of those guys could really take off. The tight end, we talk about this every year. The rookie tight ends is always hard to get off the ground unless your name's Brock Bowers and you're the only good thing catching the ball in for the Raiders. So I think those two spots right there, I think the running back and the tight end spots are going to be hurry up and wait. Like, you're going to hurry up and run to your draft boards to draft some of these guys. And I think it's going to be a lot like last year with Trey Benson and Brooks, where those were the two, huge names coming off the board. Then you had to hurry up and wait, and now you're hurry up and waiting another year for Brooks. That one hurts me a little bit. I thought I got a gold steal when they both fell to me in our draft, and I've got a nice IR spot already filled for next year. But I think that's what you're going to see with this running back and this tight end class. I don't really see anybody that jumps off the board. Yeah, they're going to have some games that are great and great for fantasy. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I got to go get these guys off of waivers or, move them off my taxis. I don't think they're going to be very consistent. Now, the receivers, there's a lot of good places that I would like to see some of these receivers go to. And I do think that, and then you talked about a take you saw earlier today about Genty slipping, not to be in the RB1 or the debate between the wideouts, excuse me. The one name I just seen shooting up draft boards, I know we're not going to talk about quarterbacks much, but that's Jackson Dart. I saw two takes today on my Twitter, or X, I apologize, that had him as the best quarterback coming out. He's got the best statistics and everything else. And I'm just like, hold up. A lot of people have started linking him to Seattle, and I don't want a quarterback in the first round personally for the Seahawks. I want us to address the offensive line with how good this class is. But I don't think you're going to get a guy that's going to shine inside the top 10 of a lot of position in any of those positions really now. Once again, you could see a receiver fall to a spot that maybe we could start that debate, but I think these are going to be hurry up and wait guys.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head there with one of the very last statements you made is I think this is a really good class for interior offensive linemen, for defensive linemen, defensive. I don't think there's a whole lot of move the needle fantasy value, which obviously we've kind of skipped over the biggest name out of all this, which is Travis Hunter, who, the big news right now is he's going to the combine as a cornerback. So that kind of paints a picture that maybe we're not going to like that for fantasy. But again, this is a situation where I think for the NFL, there's going to be some really good, drafts happen, some really good things that are going to help some of these teams out a lot, that will help some of our fantasy players. I think there is some fantasy value. Again, I think the running back position in this class really rejuvenates this dynasty landscape. I think there's some good studs in this class that eventually take over some backfields. But I do, for the most part, think this draft is worse for fantasy than it is for real life, which I don't know if I felt that way in the last couple of years, Brant. But let's go ahead and jump in on this, start talking about some of these spots. So again, we're talking about the spots, not necessarily the players. We may mention a running back or whatever. We're talking about spots. So right off the rip, Brant, rip it off like a Band-Aid. What's your number one spot for a running back to go to in this draft? That if whether, like, again, you can say if people think Genty's the number one, where if player X goes to this spot, you could see him leapfrogging Genty.
I think Dallas is the best spot overall for any running back. They had Rico Dowdle, and then the guy that's the same size as me minus weight. His weight is probably more proportionate than me.
Correct.
So I think Dallas is by far the best. The other ones I like is I like Tennessee. I absolutely don't think they really had a lead back. I do like Tennessee, and I kind of like to see a running back possibly end up in Chicago and challenge Swift. I know you and me have been big on Roschon Johnson, and I still think he has his shot, but I would like to see, that. And then the one spot that's really intriguing but could scare me in the same light is the New York Giants. They don't have a real running back there. Now, I am going to throw a name out here, Mr. Cam Scatterbo. I believe I'm going to say it. Power running back. I'm going to run through you, not around you. There's one new coach in this NFL. Well, he's not new. He's the oldest coach in the NFL that loves that type of running back. You could be seeing me talk huge about Cam Scatterbo if the Las Vegas Raiders end up with him and Pete Carroll gets his hands on a guy like that. This is a guy you could be talking about in the top 3 running backs. Most people have him in the lower tiers a little bit after 5, but still a good guy. But this is a guy that likes to run through you. I believe he's coming out as a senior, so he is a little older than some of the other ones. I'm pulling that up real fast right now. Either way, I still think that this guy getting into a running back situation where you could really run through walls could be a great fit for Cam Scatterbo.
Okay. It's interesting, Brant, because my favorite spot is also Dallas. I wrote it in big, bold letters, underlined it, circled it. I think that's the spot that it's like, hey, if somebody goes there, it'd be like the Clyde Edwards-Helaire effect of years past, where it's like, oh man, this team was a running back away. And it's like, does this start getting, like, is this player the most valuable player in this draft immediately? So I have that one as well. I also have the New York Giants written down and the Chicago Bears. The one that you didn't bring up that I think is a very interesting spot. I think they've got a pretty good offensive line already established. And one of the best coaches in the National Football League is the Cleveland Browns, Brant. Nick Chubb's a free agent. Jerome Ford had his time in the sun, but I think this is a team that wants to ground and pound, that wants to, the dog pound is typically a place that is physical. It's rough. It's nasty. I think this is a spot where you see a running back go that could be a 3-down back and really shake things up. The Cleveland Browns is low-key one of my most interesting, like, what does that offense look like next year? Because obviously, the chances of Deshaun Watson being there, Jameis Winston's a free agent, Nick Chubb, this could be a whole new identity for this Browns team next year. And it'd be interesting to see where we sit, a couple weeks after free agency leading up to the draft, how we feel about that landing spot. But again, I think, last year we went into the draft, Brant, and we both said the same thing we just said. Dallas is the spot. Dallas gets a running back. That's the best landing spot. And what does Dallas do? They watch all these running backs that would have been Braylon Allen would have been amazing in Dallas. Trey Benson, Jonathan Brooks. I don't know if he'd stayed healthy there either, but just any of these names go there. And instead of talking about, oh yeah, last year it was Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, and Brock Bowers in my draft. You're talking about one of these running backs in the top 3 last year. And then, again, instead of being behind somebody else on the depth chart, now all of a sudden it's like, hey, this guy's got some relevancy, So it's interesting to see kind of how that national or the how everybody has their favorite guys and all this, that, and the other. And then the draft happens and it's like you start watching those ADPs shift and it's like, wait a minute, this guy was way down here before the NFL draft. Now he's, surpassed player, whatever. And it's just interesting how much a landing spot does dictate things from a fantasy perspective.
Yeah, and a lot of times, a lot of people look at only the draft position. That's what people always look about. Oh, Clyde Edwards-Helaire was the number one back taken in this draft, but definitely wasn't the number one running back. So you guys have to really look forward to, like, where are they going and what's the situation?
Mm-hmm.
Carson Steele's another name. He played relevancy when all the running backs went out, was an undrafted running back. So really, where they're drafted doesn't matter. I keep reading that if Genty's there at 12, Genty's gonna be a Cowboy. You know who may make a shift at that? The team that you just brought up, the Cleveland Browns. What if they get offered a first-round draft pick at the number 11 spot, and all of a sudden they're drafting somebody above Genty? What did they see? What does this guy? That's absolutely it's more about landing spot than where they are drafted, and so I think you really got to pay attention to it. You got to do your research, and it's about where if they fit in the scheme better. Jonathan Taylor fit better in that scheme than Clyde Edwards-Helaire did in Kansas City, and I'm not going to say I was out there knowing it. I'm not going to say you knew it. You and me both thought Taylor was going to be phenomenal coming out. We talked about that quite a bit that year. But both you and me jumped on the CEH bandwagon the minute he went to the most high-powered offense in the NFL that year.
Yeah, I think most of America did. It was a knee-jerk reaction. Again, that was a very talented class. Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift, J.K. Dobbins. There was a lot of names in that class that people were excited about. And CEH leapfrogged them all, was probably behind those guys prior to the draft. And then it was like you watched everybody in drafts, ADPs, mocks. He skyrocketed. And then a lot of people were left salty about it. And that's why I think it's imperative to say you've got to look at the situation, but you also have to look at the player's overall body of work, because it does matter. Situation means a lot, right? If you say I fall in love, say your favorite running back, and I said we weren't going to bring up names, but for the sake of doing it, if your favorite running back's Judkins out of Ohio State, Brant, and he gets behind the depth chart behind a Saquon Barkley, you're going to pivot, right? If you're a team that needs running back and needs running back to make an impact early, you're not going to draft a guy sitting behind Saquon Barkley or behind Bijan Robinson or Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. You're not going to do that. So. But again, at the same time, if Dallas takes a running back in the 7th round, you're not going to put that player in front of some of the better players that have gone around it. So it matters both ways. All right, let's move on to the wide receiver position, Brant. Again, I think this is very top heavy on the wide receiver room. I haven't done a whole lot of research on the overall product you get, but I think it's a top heavy position group. Again, like Ted McMillan and Luther Burden, like we talked about. What is your favorite landing spot, and then some other spots that you really like for the wide receiver room?
My favorite one is the Raiders. The Raiders and the Chargers are my top two there. They both don't have – I know the Chargers started looking Quentin Johnston started looking very, very good at the end of the year. Ladd McConkey was a great slot guy. They still don't, in my mind, they're looking for that real outside threat identity. And honestly, I don't know if they addressed it in the draft with all the free agents that are out there. So the Raiders are kind of my favorite spot there. You've got the oldest coach in the NFL trying to rebuild this team here, which it makes no sense to me why they would go after Pete. But good for Pete. I'm happy for Pete. Marshawn Lynch is about to be your running back coach. I'm going to keep saying that until the season starts and he doesn't really get the job. I just think it'd be funny. If they were still in Oakland, I honestly think he probably would have already been hired. But some of my other ones is Kansas City. They're losing a lot. They're losing Hopkins. They're losing, I think Hollywood Brown is also a free agent. They're losing, oh my goodness, I just looked this up. Travis Kelce's getting older. That's not, they're losing a lot of talent there. And I know they got Worthy. They need another guy that will solidify that wide receiver room.
And
keep that.
Rashee Rice may be suspended as well, too,
Yeah.
which would.
Absolutely. See, you got your gadget guy with Worthy, and then you got Rashee Rice, who's going to be one of your favorites, but they've got to get a guy to solidify that slot. And I think there's a lot of options in this draft for that. I'm not going to put out any names. My favorite landing spot that I want to see one of these huge names go to is the Buffalo Bills. Get Josh Allen a legit number one. I love Coleman. I do. I think he's going to be great secondary fiddle to some outstanding wide receiver in that room. The other place, Jacksonville Jaguars. There's a good chance Christian Kirk is not on that roster.
Mm-hmm.
They added Brian Thomas Jr., phenomenal rookie year for him. They have to add something else. You can't just go in there with one receiver and hope that ETN can duplicate his numbers from 2 years ago. But I think those are some of the best spots. The Giants is another one that will be in play for a second wide receiver there. They had some of the older vets, step up. But I absolutely the Raiders and the Bills are like the two main spots that I'm looking at right now. I do think Tennessee tries to replace Calvin Ridley, but I think they're way too high to be doing that. And taking a wide receiver at the 101. I just don't see you doing that.
Okay. So you talked about some of my favorite spots. I had the Chargers written down. But that's kind of my favorite landing spot, Brant, is a spot that the quarterback position looks to be solidified for years. And not only is there not a number one wide receiver on this team, there's not a number 2 or 3 either, in my opinion. That's the New England Patriots. Mike Vrabel's in town. I think this is going to be a really exciting team in a few years. And I think this is a spot, if you see like a Luther Burden or a Tet McMillan go here, those guys are relevant for years to come. Dumping targets into those guys, again, because that wide receiver room is gross. I just think New England's one of my favorite spots. The other one, there's so many mouths to feed already, but none of them are alphas. Green Bay, I love the Green Bay spot. Again, Jordan Love's still young, lots of years to be tied to him. And they are really missing a star. Christian Watson's going to miss a decent amount of time next year. And then you got a bunch of guys on that team who just don't catch the ball very well. Dontavian Wicks, maybe one of the greatest route runners we've ever seen who can't catch the ball. Reminds me an awful lot of Kadarius Toney. Dontavian Wicks just maybe a little smarter, but it's a team that I think is void of, a sure-handed wide receiver. I think this is a spot where you could see, again, one of those guys go and just fall in love with it. And then the last one I have that I think is also a really interesting spot is the Houston Texans. Stephon Diggs is gone, and Tank Dell, we don't really know how much time he's going to miss, but he is going to miss a decent amount of next season. I've seen speculations of he may start the season on the PUP, or he'll be on the season-long IR to start the season next year. It's everywhere from in between those two. And I think, obviously, with where C.J. Stroud is in his career, they brought in a new OC saying, hey, this is Bobby Slowick's fault. We're got to turn this offense around. D'Amico Ryans, replicate that first season magic for him and C.J. Stroud. And I think you have to bring in another one of these, good wide receivers to do so. And again, I think all 4 of those teams, Chargers, Patriots, Packers, and Texans, are going to be in spots where they're going to be in that range to take a McMillan or a Burden. So I think those are the teams that I'm kind of keeping my eye on. Obviously, I like the Kansas City Chiefs too. I feel like we do this every season. Like, hey, if we can get a guy tied to Patrick Mahomes for the foreseeable future, I love it. You and I'll be the first one to say it. We both kind of crapped all over the Xavier Worthy pick last year. We both thought, this is a gadget guy. It's cute, but it's not going to be great. He's going to be second fiddle to, Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce and Isaiah Pacheco in the run game. And going down the stretch, this team was like Xavier Worthy's team down the stretch. I mean, obviously it's Patrick Mahomes' team, but Patrick Mahomes was using him a lot, and he looked really good. So again, it is nice to be tied to Patrick Mahomes, especially nice when things work out in your favor. And Kelce kind of almost looked like he lost interest in football a little bit, maybe. And then obviously Rashee Rice getting hurt. So there was definitely some benefactors of that, or beneficiaries of that. But I think you're right. I think some of those landing spots are, you notice not a single one of them that I brought up or you brought up did we really talk about a team that doesn't have a quarterback established, with the exception of maybe Tennessee. And even then you could make the argument that Will Levis was kind of cheated last year because of how bad their tackle situation was. And he was pressured on almost every drop back. So you could make the argument that every team that you want to see a wide receiver go to, they've already got an established quarterback.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's one of the things you got to look at is that quarterback established? Are they trying to rebuild it? Like if Tennessee takes Cam Ward, you're not going to jump all over the first wide receiver that he gets. You'll probably wait and maybe grab that wide receiver just to see if they develop that chemistry there. Another team that could be really interesting and factoring later in the draft for a wide receiver, and maybe you got to keep an eye on, is the Philadelphia Eagles. They've been looking for that wide receiver 3 guy. I know they have Brown and they've got Smith, but that offense could possibly sustain a decent flex wide receiver in fantasy too. So keep an eye out on if they take a wide receiver in the 3rd or 4th round with a bigger name. I don't think you're going to see some Joe Schmo come in the 4th round and be fantasy relevant, but that could be a team that could be interesting in taking a wide receiver. Or Dallas. Dallas is another one. They're fighting for that number 2 spot.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I agree. All right, let's move on to tight end and tie a bow on the show here. So again, I think this is another position that's really, really top heavy. And then I think there's some decent fillers late, but I think this is a Lovelace or Warren class, depending on how you feel, both Big Ten guys, Michigan and Penn State. So tell me your favorite tight end landing spots, Brant.
The Chargers. That's my favorite spot. I think that's one spot that you're going to see somebody. I think they'll address it early in the draft in the 1st or 2nd round. I absolutely think the Chargers will address that tight end, and I think it's a good spot for Justin Herbert to get a weapon there. But the Chargers is my favorite spot. I think the Rams could possibly need one there too. But yeah, I think my favorite one is if T. Higgins moves on. I think you get Joe Burrow, a nice blocking, receiving tight end. That could be my favorite spot. But if T. Higgins is there, I just don't think that offense will sustain 3 outstanding wide receivers. We saw 3 outstanding pass catchers. We saw Tyler Boyd be able to do it every once in a while during the season. But I think the Chargers is by far my favorite, and I think they're the ones that are going to address this quick.
So we talked about a lot, and again, I have the Chargers as my number 1 as well. So we're copacetic there. We talked about it a lot last offseason about how, hey, J.J. McCarthy or Blake Corum, one of these guys is going to be a Los Angeles Charger and reunite with Harbaugh, and it just didn't fall that way. Do we think there's a chance Lovelace ends up being the tight end that goes to the Chargers just because of the fact that Harbaugh's the one that recruited him to Michigan? He played for him in the national championship. Like, could that connection make sense?
I think it does. And I do think that's who he's going to target. And I think he's going to wait because they're in, I don't have the draft order, but I think they're in a pretty good position to pick up some of the good interior offensive linemen or even a defensive end to replace Bosa if he walks. So I think that they're going to address.
They're going to release Bosa. That was the latest thing I saw today. So
yeah, I think they're going to address that in the 1st, but I definitely think you're going to see Lovelace go in there in the 2nd round.
Okay. All right. Just a couple other spots I wrote down. I've got the New York Jets. I think that's a spot that if one of these guys goes, granted, quarterback situation is just a spot that I think they don't have that premier tight end. Then another one that I kind of think I like, and I tried to make a connection here, and maybe you tell me I'm way off. I think the Seattle Seahawks could use a decent tight end. I know they've got Noah Fant, and we have the days of Colby Parkinson and all these different names getting trotted out with Pete Carroll. But Mike McDonald's there. Where did Mike McDonald come from, Brant?
Baltimore.
And they use the tight end an awful lot in Baltimore. Mark Andrews was a focal point. Granted, I know he was on the opposite side of the ball, but typically you see those things translate. I wonder if you could see Seattle being a player for a Warren or a Lovelace, letting DK Metcalf potentially go via trade this year and making it Tyler Lockett's our safety valve, JSN's our big play, and let's work this tight end into the rotation.
Yeah, I absolutely could see that too. I think Lockett is out the door. I would love to see him retire a Seahawk, but I think Lockett is out the door. And he could contemplate retirement. I don't know what's going through the man's head. I just don't think he fits the Seattle way right now. And that's unfortunate. I think he was let's keep this guy on the roster so the entire city of Seattle doesn't hate me in my first year here. So yeah, absolutely. I could see us going after a tight end. The rest of our room left. I don't We have Barner, the rookie that we drafted last year, and Noah. And I think that's it. I'd have to go completely back, but I'm 90% sure the rest of the tight end room is gone. Even the lovely locks of, I don't even know his name, but he was definitely out there on the sideline flaunting his hair at every game, and they made sure to pan it. And I really don't know. I don't think he dressed for a single game.
Yeah, there you go. All right, there you go. New Seattle team, not the Seattle of old. So anyway, I think obviously as we get going through this offseason, Brant, we'll get a little bit more in depth with these rookies. I know you and I both have already looked at our schedules, and both of us are able to commit to, doing our annual live coverage of the NFL draft first round. I'm sure we'll holler at Patrick and probably try to get him involved as well, just because the more people to talk, the less bored we get sitting here doing it, So that's definitely something we're discussing. Again, probably trying to come at you guys quickly here in the next couple of weeks with the reaction to the coaches. And I'm ready for this offseason to start picking up so I can start getting back into head over heels in this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. We're just a couple weeks away from the official new league year. I think it's the middle of March somewhere. I had the date written down somewhere, but I don't have it in front of me. It's coming up, and this will start to pick up. We'll start diving into these rookies. I'm actually getting a little more excited to start looking at these rookies as I have a little bit of downtime as our seasons are starting to switch with my kids here. So I have a little bit of more downtime to watch a little bit of film. So I'm getting to be excited to look at these rookies, but it's so slow right now with the NFL and really everything in sports. If you think about it, you were just on the All-Star break for the NBA, and NHL just had the battle of the countries, and college basketball was rolling, but you didn't see a whole lot of big games except for Saturdays. Mm-hmm. So really, this was kind of a slow week in sports in general. I know baseball has kicked off. I think you guys were talking about spring training started for a couple teams. It's just been really slow this week. We will get back into it. We'll get picked up. But I think that does it for us today. So as always, stay hungry.
Stay fat, my friends.